Hey guys, James from SIKKY Manufacturing. Today we're gonna get back on our FRS LS swap project. We got this LS3 next to us that needs to get some SIKKY parts bolted up to it to be ready to drop into the FRS. For those who've been following this project from the beginning, you might notice that this FRS is a lot shinier than it used to be, and that's because we had to wash off all the dust that collected since last episode. But either way, we're back at it. Hopefully we're gonna be clipping these off much sooner and faster than we have in the past. Been able to make some progress. Things have been super busy around SIKKY, so not enough time to dedicate to the video series as we'd like, but we are making a big effort to get a lot more done and get this thing installed and running as soon as we can. So let's get after it. We gotta get this oil pan on here. I'm gonna show you guys how to do that step by step, make it pretty simple. There's a few key things you wanna make sure you do the right way, so I'll touch on them and make this install easy for you guys when you get to this stage. So let's get it done. All right, so if you're doing this on an engine stand, it's gonna make this job a little easier. You certainly don't have to, but I would recommend it if you can. So we're gonna flip this thing over. Make sure you drain your oil out of the oil pan. Probably gonna be some residual coolant coming out of the block, which can make a little bit of a mess, but either way, we're gonna rotate this and get it oil pan up. Ooh, yep, definitely got some fluids leaking. All right, nothing like making the shop floor messy, but so we're gonna start off by removing all these factory bolts. Pretty straightforward. Probably take these dust covers off and get them out of the way too. All right, so these are all 10 millimeters around here, so you're just gonna start by taking them off. Remove this dust cover. There's one on the other side. And we can reuse these. The cool thing about the SIKKY pan, they incorporate mounting points to put the factory dust covers back on, which, believe it or not, there is nobody else making LS pans, swap pans, aftermarket upgrade pans that actually do that. So one unique thing to SIKKY, which is great because it closes off your bell housing. You don't have to worry about sticks, rocks, debris flying up, getting in your bell housing, getting in your clutch and contaminating that. So really good selling point to the SIKKY pan option. All right, so next step, we're gonna start removing the bolts all the way around. Doesn't really matter which order you go in. You're gonna save this hardware because most of the factory hardware gets reused. All right, with all the hardware removed, we're just gonna give it a couple taps to separate it from the block. Depending how long it's been on there, it might take a little more effort. Yeah, sometimes when you're picking up on it, you feel the gaskets sticking. So you just have to work it up a little bit wherever it's not separating from the block. We're gonna be putting a new gasket on this engine, which I would recommend, but these are reusable if they're in good shape. Based on the style the gasket is, like metal with an O-ring on it. But while you're doing it, I would recommend just putting a new gasket on it. These gaskets are available at the time of checkout with your oil pan to make it convenient. All right, so next step, we got to get this pickup tube off. There are a few pans that you're going to use a factory pickup tube with, but it all depends on what we're talking: front sump, mid sump, rear sump. So the SIKKY pan will recommend which pickup tube you should run, and in some instances, you have to run the SIKKY pickup tube because it's specifically designed for that pan, whereas some of the SIKKY pans utilize an OEM pickup tube design. So either way, we're going to get this one out of the way because it will not work on the front sump pan that we're going to be putting on here. So you take this 10 mil off the oil pump side, and then we got a 13 mil back here. And another 13 mil right here. Now we can pick it up. So you're gonna wiggle it. There's an O-ring on this end that goes in the oil pump. Oh, perfect, it actually happened. So as you can see, this popped out and the O-ring didn't come with it. So there's quite a few horror stories out there, people doing pickup tube installs and not realizing. I'm not sure how, but either way, I've heard people leave this O-ring stuck in the oil pump housing like it is now. You definitely wanna get this thing out because they're gonna be putting a new one on that comes with the pickup tube, and that thing's lodged in there pretty good. This is the first time in 25 years that I've had this happen, so perfect timing for the YouTube video, but double, triple check that there's no old O-ring in there and only the O-ring that's on the new pickup tube is going in. So I'm gonna get a pick and pull that sucker out of there. All right, factory O-ring is removed. Thing's pretty deformed. Luckily, the pickup tube is gonna come with a new one, so no worry there. This is an important feature. Obviously, if the O-ring isn't sealed right, you're gonna suck air in, lose some suction at the pickup tube end, and bad things will happen. So either way, triple check, make sure that O-ring's cleared out, and we're gonna move on to cleaning up this oil pan mating surface to get it ready for the new pan. All right, so there's a million ways to do this. This is actually in pretty good shape, but you've got built up sealant on these corners here, which is a really important part about putting a pan on these LS engines. If you see, you have your front cover and your rear cover, and it creates a seam. There's a gasket between them, but this seam can often create a leak if you don't have a little extra silicone here. The other thing we see all the time is when people are putting a new engine together, they don't make sure that these two surfaces are perfectly smooth and flat, meaning sometimes they're offset a little bit, which can create a leak. So take the time, make sure you put like a flat edge on here, and you can see that there is no indent, and this cover is aligned right to the block. There's a little bit of movement on these dowel pins, so you can actually shift it a little bit to make it line up. But yeah, we're gonna clean the silicone off on the four corners, and then we're also gonna make sure there's no debris on the pan. A million ways to do it. I mean, just using some brake clean, any kind of parts cleaner, spray, just to knock the contaminants off. And we'll come back with a razor blade to get this built up silicone. When using a razor blade on aluminum, be careful. You want to make sure you don't dig in. Easiest thing is just hold it at a real flat angle. The more you tip it up, the easier it's going to bite into the aluminum. But again, we're just taking silicone off here, so we don't need to get too aggressive. Just going to make sure we get back down to clean aluminum. You can even slide it like that if your razor blade's sharp. Just work your way around, make sure it's all cleaned up. All right, so now you can use a rag, or I like these little 3M pads. They really make sure you get everything off. Cool thing about these LSs and the factory style O-ring gasket is it seals really well, so you're really just looking, hopefully there's no major scratches or gashes in this surface where the O-ring hits, but it'd be pretty rare. You would have to have somebody that previously worked on it to just beat it up or jam the screwdriver in here to pop the pan. I've seen a lot of that over the years, but it's pretty hard to mess it up, so hopefully you get lucky with having a nice flat clean surface. If you do have some small nicks or scratches, you don't normally need to put any silicone around the whole perimeter, but worst case, if you had a deeper scratch you were worried about, you could put a tiny bit on there. Just don't overdo it. You don't want to have excess silicone getting into the oil pan area, falling off, and then getting sucked into the pickup tube. Again, it would be really hard to have enough of it in there that it starves your engine of oil, but if it's possible, somebody out there will do it, so don't be that guy. All right, so I got it pretty well knocked down. I'm gonna come back around and blow any leftovers off. And lastly, just come around here and dry it off. There you go, easy as that. All right, so next step, now that we got this all cleaned up and ready for the new pan, we got to put the pickup tube on. This particular application, I'm installing one of our front sump pans, which is going to have a specific pickup tube for that design. All the pans listed on our website have pickup tubes that are recommended and needed to be used with them. It's crucial that you use the proper pickup tube. In some cases they're OEM, some cases they're custom. Either way, our custom ones are made the exact spec as an OEM one. It even looks OEM, so don't get them confused with OEM because they're different lengths. But in this case, we're using our PT1, which is going to work perfectly with this OP009, which is one of our low profile front sumps for added ground clearance, but still lots of oil capacity. But either way, straightforward, just like an OEM pickup tube. Remove it from your packaging, and you see it's got this O-ring already installed, so we literally take this, carefully work it down in this hole here. You can put a little bit of oil on if you need to. This happens to have some residual oil on the oil pump, so it slides in. You just want to make sure you're not pinching anything. And you take the little 10 mil bolt you took out and thread that guy in. And just make sure it looks even straight, and we're going to crank this down, and then we're going to install the nut back on this main cap here that holds this windage tray down. And since this particular pickup tube doesn't come all the way out here, we're going to put this back on at the same time. Now these aren't main cap torqued nuts, so you don't have to worry about anything crazy with the torque on these. You just need to get them tight. These are literally just here to hold down the windage tray and the pickup tube. All right, that's good to go. Next we'll move on to the oil pan, where there's a little bit of prep work we need to do to that before we can drop it on this engine. So let's get that taken care of. All right, so the first thing we got to do to prep this pan is we got to put the oil pan adapter block, which this is for remote mount oil filter. All the SIKKY pans come set up to run some form of remote mount, meaning the filter's off the pan. Most of the OEM applications, it's part of the oil pan itself. Since SIKKY makes pans that are great for swapping and putting into tighter engine compartments, weird obstructions with subframes and other headers, we opt to always relocate the oil filter. It makes it easier to get to. You can put it where you want it. Just makes oil changes a breeze, so there's really no downside to it. In this case, we're gonna be using our OPB03 oil pan adapter block. We make a couple different variations that have the ports coming out the bottom, the side, and even at an angle. So just about anything that fits and works with any swap need you have. So just check out our website to find out more on our different oil pan blocks. If you're shopping like pans from a universal standpoint, you can pick whichever block you want for your application. But in this case, we're using a side port that has an upward angle on it to kind of create a little extra clearance where you might have a sway bar in the way, or maybe a power steering rack, something like that. So, but this has to get installed before we put the pan on the motor, just the way it's designed. The hardware comes from the inside and it needs to be sealed up properly. So I'm going to show you guys how to put that on now, and then we'll be ready to put this pan on the engine. All right, so this, you can see the side where the block gets mounted. It's beveled or chamfered to allow these O-rings to sit down in here. And you can see there's 3 mounting holes. So in your oil pan block packet, you're gonna have like an instruction sheet that basically walks you through everything I'm gonna tell you right now. You're gonna have the block itself with the 2 large AN fittings that thread into it, as well as a smaller baggie with the 3 bolts we're gonna use to attach to the pan, and these 3 copper washers which go underneath the heads of the bolt, just to make sure we're gonna seal that up. We're also gonna apply some RTV or silicone sealant to the bolts just to make sure there's no oil getting down through the threads, because it's not under pressure at this point, but there is oil that'll pull and sit there, so just gravity and synthetic oil will have a tendency to find its way through. So you just wanna make sure you seal this up good when you're putting it together so you don't have any leaks down the road. All right, so just to show you the orientation of this hardware, You're gonna put the copper washer on like that, and then this is gonna sit down in that hole and thread into the block on the other side. So this is where we wanna put some sealant on these threads. It doesn't hurt if you get a little extra in there and it kind of squirts up and out around this bolt head. It's not gonna affect anything. So you don't have to be too careful with it, but really just wanna make sure that if anything gets past this copper washer, that it'll get caught by the sealant that's on the threads. Now the O-rings on this block at the bottom here is what goes on these holes in the taper. So it doesn't hurt with any O-ring to have a little bit of oil on there just to help it seat, but they don't pop down in, they just rest on this actual chamfer. So the bolts are what hold them in place. And they basically, when you tighten down the bolts, it'll seal this off and pull those O-rings tight into the flange. So we're ready to bolt this on now. We're just gonna get these bolts started by putting some RTV on the actual bolts before we thread them in. And then you can see it's not totally covered in the RTV, but it's got enough on there to do the job. And then start with this middle one. Just get it threaded in there by hand. So it's holding the block in place. And we're gonna get the other two started. Again, don't forget your copper washer that goes on there. I would evenly tighten these up. There is a torque spec on these, 80 inch-pounds, so I'll just work them in, kind of get them even before you actually apply any sort of torque. Just we're trying to bring this block down flat just so you're not kicking it up, causing anything weird with the O-rings. Set your torque wrench to 80 inch-pounds and then just tighten them in evenly. See the gaps start to close up as it's pulling those O-rings into the chamfer. All right, now you can feel that the bolts have tightened up to the point where the block has come in contact with the flange, so that means the O-rings are completely seated at this point. And now we're just torquing the spec to apply the right amount of tension to the hardware. All right, and that part's done. It's all torqued and sealed up. Now we're ready to move on to putting the fittings in. All right, so last step for the pan prep, we're gonna take the two fittings, the in and the out. And again, it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of lubricant on the O-ring just to help it seat. We're gonna start off by threading this in, get it tight by hand. And you can take a AN wrench if you have one and go ahead and keep turning it. You'll see the O-ring goes down into the groove and this gets tight. Just like all AN fittings or O-ring style orb fittings, it's not really about a crazy torque spec on them. The O-ring and the seal are what's doing everything. You just want to get them tight. You can often over tight these style fittings, so I'm just gonna get it in there all the way and then snug them up. They essentially bottom out once they make contact with the block. So we're good to go. All right, so before we do all the silicone on these four corners, it's always good to do a dry test fit, and you always want to use the gasket because these pans have pretty tight tolerances on some of the pickup tubes. So we're gonna open this brand new gasket up and we're gonna lay this over here and then dry fit the oil pan. You gotta work it over, there's an opening for the pickup tube, so sometimes you kinda gotta bring it in at an angle before it'll drop down. But then we're just physically eyeing it up, making sure we got good hole alignment. The only reason we're really checking for this is you wanna make sure your pickup tube clearance is right. The pans that utilize a custom pickup tube for the SIKKY pan, it's never an issue, but we've noticed that the tolerance on the factory GM pickup tubes that get used in certain pans isn't as consistent and accurate, and we've noticed that sometimes along the way there may be a situation where the tube is touching the pan. It's simple as just pushing down on it to get that little bit of clearance so it's not touching. Another important thing to touch on here is that you always want to double check the clearance between the bottom of your oil pan and the pickup tube, making sure you have at least 3/8 inch of a gap. So there's many ways to do that. The easiest thing would be if you have access to some kind of Play-Doh, you basically make a ball, put it on top of the pickup tube, set the pan down, and it'll squish it. Then you take the pan off and you just measure how thick that little pancake is that it creates, and that tells you if you've got the right clearance. So again, these pickup tubes are easily manipulated, so you can literally pull down on or push up on either which way you got to go, and it'll move into place. Sometimes you can simply take a piece of wood and tap on it with a dead blow, and that will drop that pickup tube to where you want. It doesn't hurt anything to move it around like that. Again, you're just making sure it's perfect and ready to go. So always good to dry fit. We'll note too, if you're running aftermarket oil pumps, they're often thicker than the factory one, meaning this direction. So what happens is it pulls the pickup tube that way, and in some instances it'll contact this front flange here and kind of make the pan shift forward. So if you notice your holes aren't lining up and the pan shifted a little bit forward and you're running an aftermarket oil pump, that's the cause for it. Simply clearancing the pickup tube or the pan till you get the right clearance is totally fine. You just want to, same thing, use a little bit of caution, but you can tap the pickup tube back. You can even remove a slight bit of the flange material. You just shouldn't need to do much, so I wouldn't go crazy with anything, but just note if you're running aftermarket oil pumps, there is a tendency for these to not fit as well as an OEM oil pump and create some issues. Again, now's the time to double check all this stuff. The pan should just sit here flat on its own with the gasket installed. Keep in mind, if you're installing without the gasket, some of these pans have such a tight tolerance that no gasket will cause them to hit. So most of these designs are made to be super tight to the engine, so there isn't a lot of clearance in there where you don't need it. All right, in case you've never done it, I figured I'd show you guys the process of checking your pickup tube height. So again, this is just a ball of Play-Doh. I know some people might not have access to this, but in a pinch, you could literally chew up a couple pieces of gum and get the same effect. So we just need something that'll squish and then hold that shape long enough for you to measure the thickness. So got the little Play-Doh on there. Now we're gonna set this pan back down, being careful not to knock the Play-Doh off. So let's take a little more care than usual. And we're just gonna set it down. Give it a little press just to make sure it's flat. And pick it up. As you can see, the ball is now squished, so we can carefully take this off and measure it. And it's a little bit over 1/2 inch, so we're perfect. Good to go. Again, that Play-Doh process is just a double check, so should be fine, but it's one of those things, well, while you're at it, you always want to make sure, because it's a pretty crucial thing. For some reason, this was bent either from the supplier or shipping or whatever it be, and it's touching the bottom of the oil pan. Obviously, it's not going to suck in oil at the rate we want it to, which could, you know, have a bad effect on the life of your engine. So which is why we say a 3/8 of an inch is kind of like the minimum we like to see, and you know, 1/2 inch or a little bit more than 1/2 inch is fine. So anywhere in that range is going to be perfectly fine. So just gives you another thing to just make sure you're good to go. All right, so we got the oil pan flange mounting surface clean. We confirmed the pickup tubes got the right height off the bottom of the pan, and we're just about ready to put this thing back together. But one thing we need to address is the fact that this engine block has a dipstick hole in it and about halfway down the side here. So any of the front sub pans from SIKKY, and probably most manufacturers for that matter, are going to come with an external dipstick hookup on the pan. So the SIKKY pans have a fitting that's welded to part of it where you install the SIKKY dipstick into that. And because of that, we need to actually fill the hole that's in the block. So any of your GTO, LS2, LS3, anything that had a side mount dipstick that didn't go into the pan from the factory is going to need this. Luckily, all the SIKKY hardware kits for all of our oil pans will come with this 1/8 inch NPT plug. So there's a complete hardware kit with all the things you're going to need, and the silver plug that's in that kit is the one that goes into the actual side of the block to plug the old dipstick hole. So I'm going to do that real quick, then we'll move on to putting the pan on permanently. All right, so here you can see the factory dipstick hole. You might have to take this knock sensor off to get access to it. You can take the starter off if you want, but if you're using like a tap socket, you don't actually have to. Since this hole's tapered, it actually taps real easy. So you just want to get it started. Obviously with anything you're tapping, you want to try to maintain the straight angle or perpendicular to the hole when you're getting this going, just so you try to make it tap as straight as possible. But this is pretty simple. You get this tap going, and being that it's aluminum, you're gonna go right down through here, no problem. With a NPT plug like this or an NPT tap, there's a taper on it, so the deeper you go with the tap, the further in the plug's gonna go. So just keep that in mind. You don't want to tap all the way through, because then your plug's just going to be way down in the block and you risk going in too deep. So just don't avoid that, but more than sufficient depth at this point. I'm roughly about halfway down the tap. And there's no real pressures or anything that's acting on this plug. I mean, there's might be a slight bit if you got a ton of blow by, but you've got bigger problems if you're pushing that much pressure in your crankcase. So gonna blow that out of there. Cool thing about right now is any of the metal that you're making from this process just falls right to the floor since the oil pan's not on. In a pinch, if the pan was already on and you forgot, I guess you could do this by rotating it upside down, but I would recommend knocking this step out prior to putting your pan on. All right, tap goes in freely, so we should be good to put some silicone on the plug and thread that in. All right, we're gonna apply a little bit of silicone to this hole on the threads just to help this plug seal up. And we're just gonna take it down until it gets tight and just snug it up. So now we can move on to putting some silicone on here and permanently installing the oil pan and gasket. So you're gonna take silicone, apply to these 4 key positions, which I was mentioning, or your front and rear cover. I just typically make like a small bead that just follows the seam of the cover. You don't need to overdo it. Again, we don't need it to blow out all over the place and make a big mess. As simple as that. So now we can drop the gasket on. Obviously make sure it's oriented right. I like to just set it down on there. Try not to move it around too much, but if you need to shift it a little bit, it's not the end of the world. All right, and now we're gonna set the oil pan on. Again, loosely lining it up by eye. Now we can move on to the hardware. All right, so now that it's time for the hardware, you're gonna wanna find your hardware bag. Like I mentioned before, there's a smaller bag with some NPT plugs that go in some of the other options for sensors and fittings on this pan, but in the other bag, there's 2 important bolts in the installation of the hardware, which would be these 2 Allen bolts. So these go in the front side here, these front 2 holes, because there's not a lot of clearance for the factory ones. So you're gonna start them first. And keep in mind that the gasket on here has an O-ring around the bolt, so it can be really difficult to get that. You almost have to thread it through that fat O-ring part on the gasket before you even engage the hole, and then you'll start to feel the thread. So always do this by hand. You're gonna have to wiggle and manipulate the pan and the gasket to kind of shift things around to align, but the key is don't just put a wrench or an impact on here and try to run them in, because you'll just cross thread them instantly. But they should thread in by hand. Like you can see, once I got past the gasket, that fatter like O-ring portion around the bolt, they just thread right in. So we're not gonna get these tight, we're just gonna get them down close to touching the flange surface, but I'm gonna leave them off a little bit just to make it easier to manipulate the pan around as we go. So in the hardware bag for now, that's all we're gonna use at the moment. Now we're gonna switch to the factory hardware that we're gonna use on the rest of the pan, including the 2 tall ones in the back. All right, so same thing for the factory hardware. Definitely wanna do this by hand. You're gonna have to wiggle it, get it past the O-ring portion of the gasket, and you'll feel it engage in the threads of the block. So I would start with these tall factory rear bolts. We got the front just installed. Now we got these started. Same deal. They feel snug just because of how tight the gasket is around the bolt itself, but that's what helps it to seal properly. So now we got those both started in there and they're in their holes, and I like to just work my way up. Move on to this one off just next to the flange and the oil pan block. And come up to the next one and just get them threaded in a couple threads so you know they're going in good and they feel right. For some reason you boogered up a hole while you were taking it apart, or maybe the person that worked on it last time. Now would be the easy time to fix it, so this allows you to make sure you don't have any issues. The ones with the overhang can be a little trickier, not terrible. I mean, you're gonna have to obviously use a wrench when it comes time to tighten these up. Small price to pay for the added oil capacity, which is well worth it. And finally, the last one. Now there are some LS blocks that are actually missing a hole. So if you happen to have one of them, I can't remember off the top of my head if it was 5.3s or LS1s, but if your block doesn't have the hole in it, then you don't need to put a bolt in there. So don't worry about that. But LS3s, you're gonna have every single one of these holes accounted for. All right, so now we can move on to tightening them and then torquing them. All right, so whenever you're tightening bolts on anything like this, be it a cylinder head, oil pan, you're always gonna wanna do some sort of crisscross, typically starting from the middle and working your way out. Obviously, if you came in and just cranked down on this one side, you could create some bow in it, or maybe a bit of warp. So I like to start roughly in the middle, and we're just gonna start by getting these snug. So these along the sides and the front are all gonna be final torque to 18 foot-pounds, where these back ones are 108 inch-pounds. So don't forget that's inch-pounds on the back, 108, 18 foot-pounds for all the bolts up and down the sides and the front side. So I did those middle two, and now I'm gonna move back here. Just get these tight, just working them down, to the point where we can start torquing them. And once you've done the middle, you can go all the way out to one end. It's not gonna be a big deal if I don't have to jump around over there. It's just kind of like, picture like you're squishing it out as you go from the center. That just ensures it's like a even pressure. Now, as I mentioned, you're gonna have to use a wrench on the ones under here. I personally like a ratchet wrench if you have one, just makes it a lot quicker and easier. But a good old-fashioned wrench will do if that's all you have. Same thing, you kind of want to work your way across somewhat evenly, back and forth across each side out to the ends. And lastly, I'm going to snug up these Allen bolts on the front, or socket head cap screws if you want the technical term, but I use an Allen bit just again to add extra clearance. All right, we're gonna get these snug, and now we're gonna go back and torque the center ones to the actual spec of 18 foot-pounds. And notice I didn't go right to 18, I kind of got it quite a bit tighter and then jumped across here, just so again we're trying to apply somewhat even pressure as we go. This gasket is super forgiving. It's what I love about these metal style with O-ring. And the other cool thing and major selling point to the SIKKY pan is these flanges start as a 1/2 inch thick and they're machined as smooth as glass after they're welded. So it just makes sure that thing's perfectly flat, and you're gonna make sure that it just seals up real nice. Just wanna triple check we got these guys. I'm gonna do 18 foot-pounds on this one. And then we're gonna switch to inch pounds on these. These are gonna be 108. All right, now everything's torqued from here back, and we're gonna work our way the other way. Keep in mind, I don't have a crow's foot attachment here in the YouTube room, which is how I would torque these. Basically allows you to get access to it and still put torque on it. I've been tightening bolts for the better part of my life, so my mental torque wrench is within a foot-pound or two. So given the basicness of tightening this down, I'm perfectly fine with it. You can use your best judgment. If we were talking head bolts, I would obviously make an exception and get the proper tool required to tighten this, but for the sake of the YouTube video and keeping this video rolling, we're gonna run with it. Luckily, these front ones on the side here you can reach. There's different SIKKY pans out there are gonna vary. You know, we make so many different sump variations now with several different front sumps, middle sumps, 3/4 sump, rear sump. So the instructions would apply to any of our pans, but there's gonna be slight variations that are gonna change depending on which pan you're doing. And lastly, we got the socket head cap screws out front here. There you go. The pan is fully torqued, good to go, all sealed up. Now we can move on to the rest of the items to button up this pan install. All right, so the next phase of this pan install, we're gonna get back into the hardware bag. We're gonna be installing these NPT plugs. So most of the SIKKY pan designs out there utilize a 1/2 inch NPT bung on either side of the wings, which is great for you turbo guys out there running twins or even single. You can dump your oil drain right into the pan. I also have an 1/8 inch NPT bung typically on the back side of one of the wings or extensions of the pan. So if you want to run an aftermarket oil temp sensor gauge, you can do so. Just makes it real convenient. In our case, we're not going to be running any of those, so we're going to put a silicone sealer on these and thread these in, get that done. And we're also going to get the magnetic drain plug, which comes out of the hardware bag, and install that as well. That way the pan's all sealed up and we're ready to move on to other steps. But for now, let's get that installed and I'll show you guys that real quick. All right, so first one, we're going to do this 1/2 inch NPT, which is this big hole in the back here. We'll note that this is the dipstick bung, so all the front pans, being that there's no dipstick hole that lines up through the block, you're gonna have to run our dipstick tube in here. It just maintains the proper oil level and installs pretty easy. But first step, we're gonna put a little silicone on this plug. Doesn't need to be a lot, being that it's pipe thread, but it just helps to seal up any imperfections or small crevices. As most of you know, like synthetic oil can find its way through some ridiculously small cracks. So I'm just gonna give every bit of insurance to this plug and making sure it seals up good and tight. If you're wondering, this is a 3/8 inch Allen socket. It's a little tight quarters, so an Allen wrench itself might be a little bit easier, but that's all I have available out here in the YouTube room. So you're just gonna take this in till it'll start to get tight, and you typically want to go about a 1/4 turn, and that should be enough. If you keep tightening, you're just gonna, it can literally act like a wedge, like a pipe plug is literally wedge shaped. So if you just muscle this thing in here, you could even split the pan. So just don't be that guy. You're gonna wanna get it tight, but not overkill. All right, so now we can move on and do the same thing on the other side. All right, since this side is the same as the other, I saved you guys the pain of watching that again. This one's already installed, but we're gonna move on to this 1/8" NPT plug. Same deal, a little bit of silicone. Now this is a small plug, so you don't need to over tighten it. All right, lastly, while we're on the side, we're gonna install the drain plug, which again is in your hardware bag. It's magnetic and it comes with a nice washer, so this will grab any debris that may be flying around in your engine that's steel. And you're gonna get that started and then thread it in. All right, we are all buttoned up. All right, so normally this dipstick would be something I put on after the engine's in, but just to show you how this goes together, it's gonna come typically assembled like this. Brass fitting on the bottom here with the silver fitting, which acts as a pinch on the tube. So what I like to do is I'll put some silicone on here, thread that in. Same thing, this is pipe thread, so you wanna thread it until it gets tight and then stop there. If you keep turning, it'll split this bung because it's essentially a wedge. So, but either way, you're gonna seal the threads up, get that down in there, and then you're gonna take the dipstick, thread that on, and then this is where you're gonna take 2 wrenches, hold the bottom one, and then tighten this top one down. That pinches and smashes the bottom of the tube. But you only wanna do that after you orient it right. So this will come pre-assembled. You're basically gonna take this apart. It's not in any way, shape, or form where it's gonna be. And then I like to usually mount it to this front header bolt. So you're gonna slide that up, spin this dipstick around to where you like it, and then bolt this bracket onto that. So typically this is gonna come apart, but I'll show you that in 1 sec. All right, so we're gonna apply a little silicone. Get it started. Thread it in until it gets tight by hand. I'll take over with a wrench. And I just get it snug. That's literally all you need. You don't need to kill it in there. That's it. The silicone will seal up whatever the pipe thread doesn't. And now we can get on to removing the bracket from the tube. And like I said, I'm going to show you where that goes, but we're not going to permanently install it at this point. All right, so all the dipstick tubes typically going to come with this bracket installed. It's just kind of on there as a placeholder. You can use complete freedom to orient this however you want. So I wouldn't think you're stuck with however it is. I typically just remove these components completely, get the tube mounted in place, and then worry about sliding the bracket around to get it lined up where I want it. So I'm just gonna take the stick, go down in there, and align the next fitting, the top of the one we just installed, and you can start tightening that up. So I would leave this finger tight at this point, and I would bring this up and start figuring out where we're gonna mount this up at. Typically you're gonna end up with something like this. So the 90 is gonna sit on top of, you obviously wouldn't wanna put it under the header, but all right, so typically you're gonna line this up with the top of the header flange like that, not under, so you're gonna have the header on, then slide this on, then put the bolt. And you can flex this around. I mean, this moves all over the place. So, but typically it's gonna mount something like that. So again, we're not gonna go through the full install on that, but just to show you guys how this orientation works, pretty straightforward. And again, if your application doesn't allow it to mount exactly like this, it's not the end of the world. However you wanna mount it and secure it, I've seen it bolted all over the place, but just my personal preference. It's gonna be something along those lines right there. So once you're done, then you're checking your roll like normal. Again, this is not something I would have on the engine during the install. You can install this lower piece, but I would definitely recommend leaving this off. It's just one thing that can easily bend, so we're gonna get that out of the way for now. But at least we're ready to go when the time comes. All right, so 2 final things to go over on the install of this pan has to do with the hardware. So in your hardware kit, you're gonna have these 2 larger bolts. These simply go through the back plate into the bell housing. So down here, you got these 2 large holes. So these basically go through and tie the bottom of your oil pan into the bell housing, which is a great benefit of running a SIKKY pan. From a structural integrity standpoint, it ties that pan into the bottom of the bell housing, and so your block and bell housing essentially can become one. So a great feature with the SIKKY pan. And then also you'll notice there's 2 small bolts that come in here. These are for the dust covers. If you're gonna rerun them, there's nuts welded to the side of the rear flange. Make sure you use this hardware. If you try to run a factory bolt back into that nut that comes on the SIKKY pan, it's the wrong thread. It will break that nut off and rip the threads out. So we send you the bolts for a reason. Make sure you use them. If you're gonna run your dust covers, which I highly recommend, another great benefit of running the SIKKY pan. So we're not gonna show that install, but it's pretty straightforward. Hard to mess that one up. As always, if you got questions, hit us up. We're happy to help. All right, so we got the oil pan installed on the motor. That part's done, ready to go. There are a few other things that I would call more personal preference that I like to do before I drop an engine in. I always like to take the coil packs and the intake manifold throttle body off. Just makes things easier, and then this stuff's super easy to put on later. There are some interference things on the backside that also makes it easier to have this off during the initial install. Then when you're installing the intake manifold, you can address any of those clearance items. But we're gonna knock out pulling these guys off, and then we're gonna move on to a couple chassis prep things to probably round out this particular episode. Getting real close to dropping the motor in. We're still gonna need to do the front drive water pump crank pulley on this before I drop it in, but we're getting real close. So I'm gonna strip this stuff off, probably throw the engine mounts on, take a couple other items that aren't gonna be needed with the Wiring Specialties harness, and just get this engine prepped and ready to actually be set into the car. And then I'll walk you through a couple other steps that we need to do to make some room on the car to accept this brand new engine. So let's get after it. All right, so first step, I'm gonna get these lines out of the way. Simple, like quick disconnect on these guys. Just press it in, slide it off. And then coil packs are all held on by some 10 mil. Now we're gonna set this guy aside and move on to the other side. All right, we're gonna keep moving, pulling some items off here that we're not gonna be needing. So on this particular motor, it's an LS3. There's a little harness up front here for the cam angle sensor, and we're not gonna need that. So the wiring harness from Wiring Specialties just plugs right into the sensor. You don't need this little jumper harness that is on there from the factory. And last but not least, we're gonna take the fuel rail and intake manifold off. All right, so we got all the bolts loose. Should be able to pull up on this. Sometimes you might have to pry it a little bit, but if it sticks a little, you might need to give it a little persuasion. Gives you a good opportunity too to take a look at the ports of your engine. Make sure you don't see anything sketchy going on. We're gonna clean this up a little bit, get some tape on these ports just to prevent anything accidentally falling down in. In our case, I guess now's a good time to make the announcement that we've decided to run the CD009 Nissan 6-speed on the back of this thing. We have all the transmission options here. I literally have a TR6060, a T56 Magnum F. I think earlier episodes I may even have said I'm gonna run the T56 Magnum F, so sorry if any of you guys were looking forward to that. I personally haven't used the CD09 on this swap in the FRS or BRZ yet, so I wanted to use this opportunity to check that out, the tunnel clearance, and the bell housing is a little bit smaller on that trans, so I'm curious if it requires less massaging of the sheet metal on the tunnel, so we'll get to experience that for the first time together. I think we're good to go. I'm gonna clean this up, tape it, not gonna show that on camera just because it's super boring, and then we'll pick up on some chassis prep stuff next and keep rolling. You can see I got ports cleaned and taped up so nothing can fall down in here, which will be bad news. If you can't get it out or it's not magnetic, or it falls all the way in the cylinder, then you're talking a lot of extra work. So take the time and do this if you're pulling the intake manifold off. And also do yourself a favor and use some kind of tape that comes off without leaving residue. This is like a specific masking tape that we use, which comes off, it doesn't leave anything, so you don't have any extra cleanup when you're done. All right, so that's a wrap on this episode of our FRS LS build. We got the oil pan wrapped up, the engine's just about ready to go in. Got the intake manifold coils off. Last couple things we got to do to the engine is bolt the motor mounts on and the CD09 adapter plate for the back of the block. So get all that stuff prepped, get the flywheel in, the pilot bearing, and do a couple more things to the motor. Got a bunch of stuff to do on the next episode, some final prep on the FRS itself, getting some things ready, some clearancing done. Got to get some of the lines removed that run down this driver's side of this car. So a bunch of other little things to button up before we're ready to start setting the motor in there. So make some progress, and make sure you like, subscribe, and don't miss the next episode.